It was a quiet afternoon when a young girl and her father found themselves on the side of the road, surrounded by the noise of passing cars, buses, and the distant hum of city life. The day was hot, the sun hanging heavy in the sky, and their old cart, which had once carried everything they owned, now sat broken and useless by the side of the dusty road. The wheels had cracked, and the axle had snapped under the weight of too many hardships. The father, worn by years of hard work and struggle, tried his best to fix it, but his hands were trembling from exhaustion. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a grimy sleeve, his face etched with years of worry. The girl, no older than 8, sat beside him. She had bright eyes, full of hope despite the situation around them. She clutched a small, tattered doll in her hands, a doll that had been with her for as long as she could remember. It was one of the few things that had survived their struggles. Her clothes, too, were torn, and her shoes had holes, but she didn't seem to mind. To her, it was just another day, another moment to share with her father. As he struggled with the broken cart, she hummed a soft tune, one that her mother had often sung when she was little. The song was simple, but it carried a sense of peace that made the world feel a little less heavy. The father smiled faintly at his daughter's quiet hum. He was grateful for her presence, her unwavering support. But the truth was, he didn't know how much longer they could keep going. He had tried everything, working late into the night, trying to save enough money to fix the cart, to find food, to find some way to keep them going, but it never seemed to be enough. The world outside their small bubble was unforgiving. It was easy to feel small in a world that didn't seem to care. The girl, sensing her father's tiredness, moved closer to him and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her small, innocent face looked up at him with concern. She didn't fully understand the weight of their struggles, but she understood the feeling of worry, the way it made everything feel a little harder. Her father's shoulders were hunched, and his eyes, usually filled with strength, now looked empty. "Don't worry, Papa," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "We'll be okay." He looked at her, surprised by the strength in her words. "We will, won't we?" he said, trying to smile. But the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The girl nodded, her doll still clutched tightly in her hands. Her little face, marked with dust and dirt, looked like a picture of resilience. She might have been young, but in that moment, she carried the hope of both of them. Her father couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. How had things gotten so hard for them? He'd promised her mother, before she passed away, that he would always take care of her. He would keep her safe, no matter what. But now, sitting there beside the broken cart, he wasn't sure if he could even keep that promise. A soft breeze blew, carrying with it the smell of fresh bread from a bakery down the street. His stomach growled, reminding him that they hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. There was nothing to offer his daughter. He had nothing left to give her. The guilt was overwhelming. How had it come to this? Just then, a car slowed down as it passed them, and the father instinctively looked up. He noticed the driver's glance toward them, the way he quickly looked away, as if not wanting to be seen. The father didn't blame him. He knew that, to most people, they were just another pair of poor souls on the side of the road, not worth their time or attention. As the car sped off, the father sighed and ran a hand through his messy hair. He had tried everything, but it never seemed to be enough. The world didn't see them, not really. It didn't matter how hard he worked. It didn't matter how much he tried. People kept passing by, ignoring them, judging them for being poor, for being invisible. His daughter was too young to understand all of this, but he could see it in her eyes, the way she looked up at the cars, hoping for someone to stop, for someone to notice. But no one ever did. But then, something happened that he didn't expect. As another car passed by, slowing down for a brief moment, the girl looked up. Her small eyes locked onto the face of the man driving. There was something about his expression, something that made her feel like he might actually see them, really see them. She didn't know why, but she felt a small glimmer of hope, and she looked at her father, her innocent eyes wide. "Papa," she whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "Look." The father turned, following her gaze. He saw the man in the car glancing at them for a moment before continuing on his way. But the man's look had been different kind, not dismissive. It was a brief exchange, one that could have been easily ignored. But for the girl, it was enough to spark a feeling of connection that she couldn't explain. "Maybe he'll stop and help us," she said softly, almost to herself. Her father smiled weakly, not wanting to discourage her. "Maybe, sweetheart." But deep down, he didn't believe it. People didn't stop for people like them. The world was too busy, too focused on its own problems, to notice the small moments, the quiet cries for help. They were invisible in a way that couldn't be fixed with a kind glance. The girl held onto her doll tightly, her small fingers curling around its worn-out fabric. She didn't have many possessions, but what she did have, she cherished. The doll was a reminder of her mother, a piece of the past that she clung to. "Papa," she said suddenly, her voice almost serious. "We don't need food today. Just a hug." The father looked at her in surprise. He wasn't sure what she meant. She was young, and her words didn't always make sense to him, but something in her voice, something in her heart, made him pause. She didn't ask for food or money. She didn't ask for anything more than the simple, pure comfort of being held. In that moment, she showed him something he hadn't seen in a long time, that it wasn't always the things we needed or wanted that mattered. Sometimes, all we needed was a little human connection, a little love. Her father felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected her to say that. He had thought, like so many others, that a hug wouldn't be enough. But as he looked at her, he realized that she was right. Sometimes, it was all anyone needed just to feel that someone cared, just to feel that someone was there. Without saying a word, he opened his arms and pulled her close. The girl didn't hesitate. She climbed into his arms, her small body fitting perfectly against him. And for a moment, the world outside them faded away. There was only the warmth of each other's embrace, the comfort of knowing they weren't alone. It was a simple moment, but for both of them, it was everything. The man held his daughter tightly, feeling the small warmth of her body nestled against him. Her little hands were still clutching her doll, and he could feel her steady breathing against his chest. It was such a simple moment, but in the midst of their struggles, it felt like everything. For a brief instant, the weight of the world seemed to lift, and all that mattered was the love they shared. The rest of the world could wait. The father closed his eyes, taking in the quiet sounds around them, the distant hum of traffic, the rustling of leaves in the trees, the occasional bark of a dog in the neighborhood. The world was still moving, but in this small corner of it, he and his daughter had carved out a little bubble of peace. He wanted to hold on to that feeling forever. After a moment, the girl pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those big, wide eyes that seemed to hold all the innocence in the world. She gave him a small, hopeful smile, and for the first time in what felt like ages, her father smiled back. It was a small, fragile smile, but it meant everything to both of them. "Papa," she said softly, her voice still carrying that same quiet strength, "do you think someone will help us?" He blinked, taken aback by the question. He hadn't expected her to ask. In his mind, he had already prepared himself for the long days ahead, filled with struggle and uncertainty. But his daughter had never been one to give up hope. Even now, in the face of everything that was wrong, she still believed that help could come, that someone might notice them and offer a hand. "I don't know, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't want to crush her hopes, but he knew the truth. Sometimes, people don't stop. They're too busy with their own lives. The girl didn't seem discouraged. Instead, she simply nodded and gave him another smile, her eyes bright with an unspoken understanding. She may not have fully understood the challenges they faced, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let go of the hope that things could get better. Not for herself, and not for her father. "I think someone will stop," she said firmly. "Maybe they'll help us fix the cart, or maybe they'll give us some food. I think we just need to keep believing." Her words were simple, but they struck him deeply. She was so young, and yet, she had such a clear sense of hope and determination. It was a kind of hope he had lost over the years, buried under the weight of endless struggles. But here, in this small moment, his daughter was teaching him something. Maybe hope wasn't something that came with the promise of a perfect life. Maybe it was something you had to choose, even when everything else seemed impossible. He squeezed her hand gently, not knowing how to respond. He wasn't sure how he had become the one who needed teaching, the one who had forgotten what it meant to hope. But he knew he couldn't let her down. She deserved that hope. She deserved to believe that things could be different, that there was something more to life than the constant fight for survival. Just as they were sitting there, quietly sharing this moment, a car slowed down in front of them. The father didn't immediately look up, he was too caught up in the warmth of his daughter's presence. But then, the car came to a complete stop, the engine humming softly in the background. The father glanced up, surprised. People rarely stopped for them. Most of the time, they passed by without so much as a second glance. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. He looked about middle-aged, wearing a pair of sunglasses and a shirt that looked a little too expensive for a neighborhood like theirs. For a moment, the father felt a flicker of uncertainty. Was this someone who would just ignore them, or would they be lucky today? The man's gaze shifted from the broken cart to the girl sitting beside him, and then, for a brief second, their eyes met. The man's expression softened for a moment, as if he could see beyond their worn clothes and dirty faces. There was something about the way he looked at them that felt different from the usual cold indifference. It was almost as if he saw the humanity in them, something that others so often overlooked. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The man didn't drive off immediately. Instead, he slowly lowered his window and leaned out slightly. The father wasn't sure what to expect, but a part of him didn't want to get his hopes up. People didn't stop. They didn't care. But then, the man spoke. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice warm but uncertain, as though he wasn't sure how to offer assistance. His gaze flicked to the broken cart and then back to the father and daughter. The father hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want help. He just didn't want to burden anyone. And yet, there was something about this man that made him think maybe this time would be different. "We're fine," the father replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Just fixing the cart. We'll manage." But the man didn't pull away. Instead, he glanced back at the girl, who was still holding her doll in her hands, her eyes wide and curious. There was a pause, and then the girl spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "We don't need food today," she said, her words carrying the kind of innocence and sincerity that only a child could offer. "Just a hug." The man blinked, taken aback by her response. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to react. He had expected them to ask for money, or perhaps food. But a hug? That was unexpected. He looked at the girl, who smiled up at him with those big, trusting eyes. And then, he looked at the father, who was watching quietly, his expression unreadable. The man took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what to do next, but something inside him told him this was the right thing to do. He opened his door and stepped out of the car, walking over to the girl and her father. Without saying a word, he crouched down to the girl's level and extended his arms. The girl, as if she had been waiting for this moment, eagerly stepped into his embrace. It was a simple hug, nothing extravagant, nothing life-changing, but for the girl, it was everything. And for the man, it was a reminder of the power of a small act of kindness. The father watched, feeling a lump form in his throat. In all his years of struggle, he had never expected to receive something like this, something so simple yet so meaningful. A hug. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The man smiled at the girl as she pulled away. "You've got a lot of hope, kid," he said, his voice soft but sincere. The girl beamed back at him. "You've got to keep believing," she said simply. "Even when things are hard." The man nodded, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. He hadn't expected to find something so meaningful in a moment like this, but here he was, reminded of what really mattered. And for the first time in a long time, he believed, just a little bit, that maybe things could get better after all. The man stepped back, still feeling the warmth of the girl's embrace lingering in his chest. He didn't know what had come over him. He had been passing by, in a hurry to get somewhere, yet something about the girl's words and her innocent request had stopped him. It was as if, for a brief moment, everything in the world had slowed down, and he saw them not just as a broken-down cart on the side of the road, but as people, as a father and daughter who needed help. He stood there for a moment, watching the girl's bright face and the way her father looked at her, a mixture of pride and something else, something softer, almost vulnerable. The father had tried to act tough, to hide the strain of their situation, but the man could see it now. He could see how tired the father was, how much he was trying to hold everything together. It was in the way he moved, the way he looked at the broken cart with a mix of frustration and defeat. "Is there anything else I can do for you?" the man asked, his voice a little quieter now, more sincere. The father hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. He didn't want to admit it, didn't want to seem weak, but the truth was, they needed more than just a hug. They needed a way to fix the cart, a way to get food for the day, a way to keep going. He had never been one to ask for help. He had always believed that he should be the one taking care of his family, providing for them, no matter what. But standing here, in front of this stranger, he realized just how exhausted he truly was. "We could use a little help," the father said, his voice low. "The cart's broken, and we don't have the money to fix it." The man nodded, understanding the unspoken weight behind the father's words. It wasn't just about the cart. It was about everything, about the struggle to keep going, the battle to survive day after day, with nothing more than hope to hold on to. The father had done everything he could, and yet, here they were, stuck on the side of the road, with no way to move forward. "I've got some tools in the trunk," the man said, glancing toward his car. "I can help you fix it, if you'd like. It won't be much, but it should be enough to get you going again." The father looked up, surprised. He wasn't used to accepting help from anyone, especially not a stranger. But something in the man's eyes told him that he wasn't just offering a quick fix. He was offering something more, something that had been missing from the father's life for a long time, a moment of kindness, of shared humanity. "Thank you," the father said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'd really appreciate it." The man smiled, his face softening. "No need to thank me," he replied. "Sometimes, we all need a little help." As the man went to open his trunk and pull out the tools, the father looked at his daughter. She was still sitting on the ground, clutching her doll, her small hands pressed tightly around it as if it were the only thing that had ever made her feel safe. She looked up at her father with that same unwavering faith, as though she knew everything would be okay now. And for a moment, just a moment, the father allowed himself to believe it too. Maybe things would get better. Maybe this small act of kindness could be the start of something different. The man worked quickly, fixing the cart with careful precision, his hands moving efficiently as he tightened bolts and adjusted wheels. It wasn't a complicated job, but it was something the father couldn't have done alone. The girl watched with wide eyes, her gaze bouncing between the man and her father. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the change in the air, the way everything seemed to shift, just a little. When the man finished, he stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag, admiring his work. The cart was no longer broken. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. It would hold together long enough for them to get where they needed to go. "There you go," the man said, giving the father a nod of approval. "It should be good for now. Just be careful with it, all right." The father stood up slowly, his face a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He hadn't expected it to be this easy, hadn't expected anyone to actually stop and help. The world was full of people who just passed by, who didn't care, who didn't want to get involved. But this man, this stranger, had done more than just offer a quick fix. He had given them something precious, a moment of kindness in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. "Thank you," the father said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll never forget this." The man smiled again, his expression warm but sincere. "It's no trouble at all. Sometimes, the smallest things make the biggest difference." As the man walked back to his car, the father turned to his daughter, who had been watching the whole time, her eyes shining with something like hope. She looked up at him, a small smile on her face. "I told you, Papa," she said softly. "I told you someone would help us." The father smiled back at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and awe. How had she known? How had she kept that hope alive when everything seemed so uncertain? She had shown him something he had almost forgotten, the power of believing, of holding on to hope even when it felt like the world was against you. The father and daughter watched as the man drove away, disappearing into the distance. The cart was fixed, but it wasn't just the cart that had been repaired. Something inside them, something deep within their hearts, had been fixed too. It was the belief that kindness still existed, that there was still good in the world, even if it was hidden beneath the surface. As they prepared to leave, the father stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, his voice softer than it had been in days. "Let's go home." And for the first time in a long time, the journey ahead didn't seem so impossible. The road ahead was still long, and the day had yet to show its final chapter. The father, though grateful for the unexpected help, couldn't help but feel a new weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just the cart being fixed, though that was a relief. It was something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of possibility. As they began to push the cart, slowly and carefully, down the road, the father found himself thinking about the stranger's words. Sometimes, the smallest things make the biggest difference. The truth of those words had stuck with him. It had been such a small act, fixing a cart, that anyone else might have ignored, but it had brought with it something priceless. It had brought back a sense of hope. His daughter, still holding her doll tightly, was skipping beside him, humming that familiar tune she always sang. He glanced down at her, her face bright despite the circumstances. For a moment, he marveled at her resilience. She had this incredible ability to keep going, to keep believing, no matter how hard life seemed. She was like a small light in the darkness, showing him that there was always something to hope for, even when everything seemed lost. "Papa," she said, looking up at him with those wide, hopeful eyes. "What if we meet someone else who needs a hug?" The father chuckled softly, the sound filled with warmth. "Well, if we do, I think we'll be ready," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. He wasn't sure what had changed inside him in the past few hours, but he felt different. It wasn't just the practical things like the cart being fixed or the fact that they now had a chance to make it further down the road. It was something inside his heart. Something that made him believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be better. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if they'd find a warm meal or a safe place to sleep. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of facing it. The cart rolled smoothly now, no longer dragging them down with its brokenness. They passed by other people on the road, and the father noticed how many of them walked with their heads down, lost in their own worlds. It made him think about how often he had done the same, how often he had walked past people without seeing them, without thinking about their struggles. He had always been so focused on surviving, on getting through each day, that he had forgotten to truly look at the people around him. Maybe that was the gift the stranger had given him, not just the fix for the cart, but the reminder that there was more to life than just surviving. There was living. There was kindness. There was connection. The girl skipped ahead of him, her small legs moving with surprising speed for someone so young. She had always been full of energy, always running off to explore new things. The father had often wondered how she kept so much hope alive inside her. How did she stay so cheerful, even when everything around them seemed so bleak? As he watched her, he realized that maybe she had figured something out long before he had. Maybe she understood that hope wasn't something that came from things or circumstances. It came from inside, from the way you saw the world, from how you chose to live each day. She wasn't waiting for something big to change. She wasn't waiting for life to get easier. She was living fully in the moment, making the most of what she had. "Papa," she called over her shoulder, her voice high with excitement. "Look. There's a flower." The father followed her gaze and saw a small, delicate flower growing at the side of the road. It wasn't much, just a tiny splash of color in the middle of all the dust and grime, but to his daughter, it was everything. She knelt down beside it, examining the flower with awe, as if it were the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It's so pretty," she said, her face lighting up. "I'm going to pick it for Mama." Her words struck him deeply. She had never really known her mother, not in the way he had. But she remembered. She remembered the love, the warmth, the comfort that came from the simple act of caring for one another. He knew that, deep down, she carried her mother's spirit with her, in the way she looked at the world with wonder, in the way she believed that even the smallest moments were worth cherishing. He watched as she gently picked the flower, her small fingers so careful not to damage the delicate petals. She stood up and handed it to him, her eyes full of hope and love. "Can we keep it, Papa?" she asked, her voice so sweet. He took the flower from her, his heart swelling with a mixture of love and sadness. "Of course, sweetheart," he said softly. "We'll keep it forever." It wasn't just the flower that meant something to him in that moment. It was the way she had found beauty in something so simple. It was the way she had made the best of a difficult situation. She had found a way to keep something alive, something pure and untainted despite all the hardships they had faced. The father took a deep breath, the smell of the flower filling his senses. He wasn't sure how long they would have this cart, or how many more days they would have to struggle. But in that moment, with his daughter beside him and the flower in his hand, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. They continued on their way, the cart rolling smoothly beneath them. As they passed by more people, the father found himself noticing the little things: the way the sun filtered through the trees, the laughter of children playing nearby, the quiet hum of life around them. He realized that there was so much beauty in the world, so much life to be lived, if you just took the time to look. And even though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone. They had each other. They had love. And maybe, that was enough. As the day began to fade and the sky turned orange and pink, the father and daughter came to a small bridge over a creek. The water glistened in the fading sunlight, and the girl gasped with delight. She ran ahead, eager to get closer, and the father followed, his heart light. They paused by the water, watching the ripples as the breeze blew across the surface. The girl tossed a small stone into the water, her eyes tracking its path as it skipped across the surface. Papa, she said, turning to him. What do you think comes after the water? He smiled softly, his heart full of love for this little girl who always asked the questions that mattered most. I think, he said, there's always more. There's always something beautiful waiting for us. The girl smiled, her eyes shining with that same hopeful spark. I think so too, Papa. And for the first time in a long time, the father truly believed it. The days that followed felt different for the father and daughter. It was as if a new sense of purpose had settled within them, a quiet belief that the world, despite its harshness, still held small moments of goodness. Every step they took, every turn they made, felt lighter, as if the weight that had once burdened them had shifted, even if just a little. The cart, though patched up and imperfect, rolled smoothly beneath them. Each time the father looked at it, he remembered the kindness of the stranger, the simple, yet life-changing act that had sparked something inside him. He found himself more willing to look up at the world around him, more willing to see the people he passed, rather than just the road ahead. He noticed how the trees seemed to sway more gently in the wind, how the sky had a little more color at sunset, how the laughter of children playing brought a warmth to his heart that he hadn't expected. The girl, of course, had always noticed these things. She had a way of seeing the world that he envied. She still skipped ahead of him, her small feet dancing across the earth, her doll tucked under her arm. She would point out things that seemed ordinary to him but were extraordinary to her: a ladybug on a leaf, a bird perched on a fence, a patch of wildflowers growing along the side of the road. Papa, look. A rainbow, she called one afternoon, tugging on his sleeve as she pointed to the sky. He squinted up at the horizon, where the sun had just started to dip below the trees. A faint arc of colors appeared, barely visible but still there. It wasn't a bright, full rainbow, just a small, quiet reminder that beauty often came in unexpected forms. He smiled and nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. I see it, he said softly, his voice full of emotion. It's beautiful. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the world was passing him by. It was as if he had stopped running and had started living again. His daughter had reminded him of something he'd forgotten, the importance of noticing, of being present in each moment, no matter how small. As they continued down the road, they reached a small town. The streets were bustling, but in a quieter, slower way than the busy city they had come from. There were local markets, vendors selling fresh produce, and children playing in the streets. The father noticed the community, how people greeted one another with smiles and handshakes, how they seemed to care for each other, even in their own struggles. It was a contrast to the loneliness he had felt before, when it seemed like everyone was too busy to notice anyone else. They passed a bakery, and the sweet smell of fresh bread filled the air. The girl paused, taking in the scent with a delighted sigh. Papa, can we get something to eat? She asked, her voice hopeful but not demanding. He felt his heart tighten. They hadn't eaten properly in days, and the money in his pocket wasn't enough to buy food. But there was something about the way she asked, so simple, so trusting, that made him want to give her the world. He looked at the bakery window, where warm loaves of bread sat neatly arranged, their golden crusts shining in the sunlight. He looked at the woman behind the counter, who was busy kneading dough, but paused for a moment to look up at them. She offered a smile, a welcoming one, as if she saw something beyond their worn clothes and tired faces. Excuse me, the father said, his voice soft. He had to ask. How much for a loaf of bread? The woman looked at them both, her eyes softening as she took in their appearance. She didn't seem to hesitate. It's on the house, she said with a smile. I'll get you a fresh loaf. It's the least I can do. The father blinked in surprise, a lump rising in his throat. He had expected to pay whatever little he had left, but this woman, this stranger, was offering them something without asking for anything in return. For a moment, he couldn't speak. It wasn't just the bread. It was the kindness, the simple act of generosity, that reached deep into his heart. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means." The woman nodded, her smile never fading. "It's no trouble at all. We all need a little help sometimes." She handed them the bread, warm and soft, wrapped carefully in a cloth. The father took it, feeling the weight of it in his hands. It wasn't just food. It was hope. It was a reminder that, despite all the hardship, there were still people who cared, people who would help when you least expected it. As they walked away from the bakery, the girl skipped beside him, munching on a small piece of the bread. Her face lit up with joy, and the father couldn't help but smile, his heart lighter than it had been in so long. He glanced down at the loaf in his hand, then at the girl. She looked up at him with that same trusting smile she always wore. "Papa," she said between bites, "we're going to be okay, aren't we?" The question, simple as it was, struck him to his core. How many times had he asked himself the same thing, and never truly believed the answer? But now, standing here with his daughter, a loaf of bread in his hand, and the kindness of strangers still fresh in his heart, he knew. He didn't need to wonder anymore. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're going to be okay." It wasn't that they had everything they needed, or that their struggles were over. The road ahead was still uncertain, and life would continue to throw challenges their way. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while: peace. It wasn't a peace that came from having everything figured out. It was a peace that came from knowing they weren't alone, from knowing that even in the darkest moments, there was always a glimmer of light, waiting to be found. As they continued down the road, the world seemed a little brighter. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the path, but the colors in the sky were warm, filled with soft oranges and pinks. The girl walked beside him, her doll clutched tightly in her hands, her smile as wide as ever. She didn't need much. She had learned to find joy in the small things: the beauty of a flower, the warmth of a hug, the kindness of a stranger. And that was enough. The father looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. He had spent so much time worrying about what he didn't have, but now he realized that he had everything he needed right here. He had his daughter. He had love. And maybe, just maybe, that was all they would ever need.